Well, if you hear those drum beats, you know that it is time for Africa Speaks. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to you. This is Africa Speaks. I'm John Allen Namu, standing in for Joy Doreen Bira. Now, this week, we're still discussing Uhuru Kenyatta's looming trial date at the International Criminal Court. Yesterday, President Kenyatta got some respite from the court when it ruled that his attendance would not have to be continuous. But will he take the deal? Neither the court nor the UN Security Council has responded to the concerns raised during the AU Special Summit that took place last week. And if they don't, by November the 12th, then the AU has asked that Uhuru Kenyatta not attend the trial. Now, we'll be discussing that, and our question this week is, do you think that the ICC is a blessing or a curse on this African continent of ours? You can send us your tweets on @KTN Africa Speaks, or tweet me on @John Allen Namu, the hashtag, of course, being Africa Speaks. Now, we'll get into that shortly with KTN Associate Editor Aaron Ochieng. But first, to our first segment, Click. Now, do you think there are people who are slaves in this day and age? Well, according to a global slavery index, beg your pardon, nearly 30 million people around the world are living as slaves. The report, which ranks 162 countries, states that India has the highest number of people living as slaves. Africa, too, has taken a fair share of these illegal yet inhumane conditions. Mauritania has 4% of the 3.4 million strong population that is said to be held in slavery. Ethiopia and the Democratic Republic of Congo, all within this region, are also on the top 10 list. The index was compiled by Australian-based rights organization using the rights organization, of course, being a walk-free, using a definition of modern slavery that includes debt bondage, that's something that's very strong in India, forced marriage, and human trafficking. So what can be done to end modern slavery, and does it actually happen in your country where you live? That's a topic we'll be discussing in the near future on Africa Speaks. Now, to the respite that President Uhuru Kenyatta got from the court, albeit under strict conditions. The trial chamber before which President Kenyatta's case is being heard partially granted Kenyatta's request that he not be continuously present for his trial. Here's Managing Editor Joe Ageo's piece on the same 4-hour segment, Web City.
Kenya's diplomacy has been on overdrive, with top officials fighting to have the president excused from attending the Hague proceedings.
Circumstances different, absolutely, totally, completely different. Before, he wasn't the head of state of the Republic. Today, he is the head of state of the Republic. It's going to be the first time that a serving head is brought before any court of any kind, not just here, but anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world.
Indeed, Kenya's diplomacy saw the African Union pile even more pressure on the Hague-based court, giving an ultimatum to stop the proceedings against the president or have them withdraw en masse from the Rome Statute, the international treaty that created the ICC.
We have also adopted our decision speaking with one voice and sending a strong political message on Africa's relations with the ICC. We have agreed that no charge shall be commenced or continued before any international court or tribunal against any serving heads of state or government or anybody acting or entitled to act in such capacity during his or her term of office.
And up until now, the next movement was expected to come from the UN Security Council. But now the Hague-based court appears to have complicated matters for Kenyan diplomats. In a ruling delivered earlier today, the judges agreed by a majority of 2-1 to allow President Kenyatta to attend the following sessions: the opening and closing statement of all parties and participants, the hearings where victims present their views, the delivery of judgment, and, if applicable, the sentencing hearings, the delivery of sentencing, the victim impact hearings, and the reparations hearings. At the Security Council, Kenya was hoping to convince the 15 members that the president's continued absence during the trial could imperil the war on terrorism following the Westgate attack. It is now not clear what impact this latest ruling will have on the prospects of a deferral as requested by Kenya. President Kenyatta is accused of being an indirect co-perpetrator in the post-election violence that followed the disputed presidential election in 2007. He is charged with 5 counts of crimes against humanity, consisting of murder, deportation or forcible transfer, rape, persecution, and other inhumane acts.
Now remember, you can watch that story as well as this show online at www.standardmedia.co.ke. Now onto the platform. So Uhuru Kenyatta will not have to attend his trial continuously. That's the new development at The Hague. But what does it mean? And does it stop the clock from ticking on the AU's November the 12th deadline? Now, here on the platform to discuss this with us is Aaron Ochieng. He's our associate editor and has covered the ICC trials extensively. Welcome to the show, Aaron. I know this is irregular hours for you considering that you're usually on in the mornings.
Yeah.
Now, Aaron, before we even discuss the main meat of this, the trial chamber had 2 assenting opinions on the same and 1 dissenting decision. Look, it's a judicial matter, but what does that say to you in terms of the reading of what perhaps the ICC is thinking at this time?
First of all, it was big news coming from ICC yesterday, of course exempting the president in some sittings. But I wouldn't say it is time to celebrate for those who, or for the president, because you remember a similar issue happened to the deputy president, William Ruto, and immediately the prosecution side, led by Fatou Bensouda, appealed the decision, and that appeal has not yet been granted. That appeal has not yet been ruled on. So we are yet to see. Suppose Bensouda Monday morning goes to the ICC and appeals, then it will be the similar case as to what happens to William Ruto, and probably they might use the same manner of execution, saying that Ruto, that decision, Ruto will still have to be present until they make a decision. I'm not seeing it different if Fatou Bensouda appeals. So they might even ask the president.
But you know, Aaron, actually, the circumstances, and let's be honest, I mean, the circumstances that face Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto are slightly different. I mean, this is something that is a controversial talking point in Kenya right now. Is it the office of the president or the president himself that is on trial? But be that as it may, the president is the head of state of this country, and perhaps that might provide some insights into the ruling.
Yeah, it will provide some insight, but the prosecution, they need to have a strong case, you remember, and they have avenue for appeal, and I will not be surprised if they use that avenue to appeal. But be it as it is right now, and the president is exempted from certain sittings, he will have to appear for the opening, and when the witnesses present their first presentation, and maybe the closing remarks, and if they found guilty, he will appear for the sentencing and subsequent hearings. But if you ask me, based on how we've seen a Ruto case go, it might not even favor the president so much, because we've seen witnesses who are giving their evidence for 3 days. So if day 1 is the opening statement and day 3 is the closing statement,
of course,
so
it means have to stay at the Hague. Yeah, that's true.
So it means the president will just have to stay there. But you never know. He might travel, and it might not even be able to effectively use this window that he's been given. So based on the kind of evidence that the witnesses will have, that is when we will see the effect of this particular ruling that was made yesterday. But in most cases, if all the witnesses will go the route away, we might even see the president still staying there for a substantial time.
That is true, and this is a controversial talking point, not just in Kenya, but on the African continent. Of course, today on Africa Speaks, our main question that we're asking you at home is the ICC a blessing or a curse on this continent? Aside from what's going on in Kenya, what are your opinions on the same? You can tweet me on @JohnAllenAmu and use the hashtag @AfricaSpeaks, rather, not @AfricaSpeaks, but Africa Speaks. Now, Aaron, there's something interesting that you mentioned, the preconditions that have been set by the trial chamber. It's not just a blanket, here you don't have to be here continuously and we'll only call you when we need you. There are specific preconditions to this granting of non-continuous stay at The Hague. Has the ICC wrong-footed the African Union? You remember how strongly they spoke last week.
I think, if you ask me, I think yesterday's decision may have been informed by what happened in Addis Ababa, with heads of state coming together and saying, hey, we need to protect one of our own. And then just a few days after is when ICC is coming. Probably they are saying, let's go easy on this particular case. As a matter of fact, the Kenyan case has been cooperative. It's not like the other cases that they had, like, for example, the DR Congo or the other place. But for ICC's decision to be made yesterday, I bet they might have sat down and said, okay, let's go easy. This is the head of state. And of course, we know a head of state has responsibilities and there are legal consequences for his absence in a country. So if he does not show any cause that we should be tough on him, let's be easy on him. Let's be easy on him. Let's be easy on Africa, because what is coming out right now is, I think ICC is a court that was created to prosecute
for Africa. And actually, that's my next point. You see, whereas the president is head of state, and those considerations can be made by a court that isn't supposed to be bound or listen to political considerations, what the African Union did was unprecedented. I mean, you could tell from the responses from Western diplomats in trying to prepare something to take to the United Nations Security Council that this was a big decision. So are we seeing the first, at least for people who are more objective about the ICC, are we seeing the first instances of a court that listens to political considerations?
Another thing that you mentioned there is Western diplomats based in Africa. After the AU's decision, some of them, especially those ones representing their countries in Kenya, they also made their own appeal to their countries, especially those that are members in the Security Council, that they should give some consideration to the Kenyan case. I think that is a very big step for us to see countries like France and China and the rest who have a big stake in the Security Council appealing to ICC to go easy on that. I think that is a big step to the Kenyan case. But besides yesterday's decision, there's a bigger decision that ICC could be making in regard to this particular case. But this one will have to wait for an application from the United Nations Security Council. But this is just it's a step just to show that we are approaching the Kenyan case with some ease.
With some care.
With some care also. And let's wait and see the African Union's application to the United Nations Security Council. If it is made official, then we see the next step that the UN Security Council will take towards ICC. And let's see what ICC will decide.
Okay. Yeah. Now, another issue that we need to discuss is whether this is more about the ICC, this last decision is more about the ICC than it is about the Uhuru Kenyatta case. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let me read some tweets from you at home following the show. Victoria Nyamboke says that the ICC is a curse to the guilty, but a blessing to the innocent. There's someone else here who's spoken about this. Stanley, Atonya Stanley says, as far as I know, ordinary African citizens haven't been hurt by it, only the despots. Gabriel on @Gabs Reblineg says, ICC is a savior to Africans because of leaders that would like to rise to power through shedding blood. Now, it sort of segues into the question that we're talking about. Very neatly dovetails into this. There's a question of victims, there's a question of leaders, but there's also the question of the reputation of the International Criminal Court, considering that 34 of the 121 states that are signatories to the Rome Statute live and breathe on this continent. So was the decision by the judging, by the trial chambers also something to save face for the International Criminal Court? I mean, it could lose quite a bit if those tough stances were to be held.
Yeah, but the mere fact that 34 heads of state from the continent of Africa could come together and say, hey, I think you're taking this continent a bit too far in terms of these cases. Actually, we are the ones who created this court. It is a court that is supposed to look for our welfare. And it is the same court now that is sort of making our rule or governing our countries difficult. So they're telling them we need to be easy unless we pull out. And if Africa pulls out of ICC en masse, it also means that ICC will lose some credibility. Not even credibility, some. It will lose credibility. And if I got back to some of the tweets that have been tweeted, it shows how majority of Kenyans feel about this particular case. But what I would also say is that I think we've also forgotten why these cases are on. I think the process that has been going on lately, the indictment and the president going, the deputy president going, coming back, I think there's something that is slowly fading from our memories, and that is what happened in 2007,
and
2008. And they are victims. And justice has to be done. We need to see justice prevail. But I think events have overtaken 2007, 2008, and now it is being seen that it is the three Kenyans who are facing trial for this particular,
rather than the three people who are suspected of perpetrating very heinous crimes
and
against.
they've forgotten the thousands, 1,500 plus people who lost their lives. I think, but basically, if you ask me how best we should be handling this particular matter, is we need also to see their suspects, let them clear their names, but at the same time, let's have justice to the victims of the violence.
Yeah. Now, the victimhood is something that is becoming a point of contention on this continent. Look, there is the victimhood of the person whose house was torched, who lost a relative, who lost his or her life. And that is the one that drove these cases, at least from what we're told, to the International Criminal Court. But there is a point in speaking about the victimization of Africans. And I mean, this is something that people who also have been proponents of the court have spoken about. Telecommunications magnate Mo Ibrahim, a person who hasn't given a prize for leadership over the past 4 years to any African leader, has gone on record stating that, look, yes, Africans should respect the International Criminal Court, but the International Criminal Court should also consider the fact that crimes that fall under the jurisdiction of the ICC don't just happen on this continent. Is that something that you think will become more of a conversation as we head into this trial?
I think so, because if you look at some of the happenings globally in terms of violence and war crimes, I think Africa is on the lesser side if we compare it to parts of Eastern Europe in the late 90s
and the Middle East
even up to now. Have we seen ICC making inroads there? Those are the questions that the 34 heads of states were asking themselves in Addis Ababa. So is it ICC was created particularly to deal with us? They are members, they are strong members of the Security Council themselves, who might be making decisions in regard to Kenya, who are not signatories to the ICC, the likes of the United States and China and France. So some of these things may have been discussed closed doors when the leaders were meeting and saying, okay, we are taking this case to the United Nations Security Council. These are the same people who pushed us to sign the Rome Statute. They are not members they are not signatories of the Rome Statute.
Well, I mean,
they are the same people who will be making decisions. Is this neo-colonialism?
That's a very important point, Aaron. Of course, a counterpoint to that, as stated by the United States as well as these other countries, is that, look, we think that the International Criminal Court, especially the powers of the prosecutor, are rogue. That's something that has been stated various times, and that nations such as the United States have robust enough judicial systems within their own countries to deal with crimes that would fall under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. That's also an argument. I mean, it's a fair point. We've seen people who've been tried for very heinous crimes in the United States, people from around the world. But yes, the question of neo-colonialism is something that will not die. We'll get to that in a moment, Aaron. Let me take a few more of your responses. Ambuli Victor, on the question of whether the ICC is a blessing or a curse on this continent, Ambuli Victor, you say that the ICC is such a blessing, though polarized by Kenyans on tribal front of the potent indictees. Mutuku Fred on I am Mutuku Fred says ICC as a curse now defines our politics. It's the only hope for justice for victims as a blessing. Now, Sudi Juma says, in the 50s, it was an act of terrorism to fight colonialism. ICC could be a new frontier for Africa for its dignity. Very philosophical point that we were just speaking about, the question of neo-colonialism. It won't have anything to do with the price of tea in China or how the case goes for that matter. But politically and philosophically speaking, are we seeing Africans rising up and saying, hey, we can't be treated the way we were treated 50 years ago, especially as regards this case?
Yeah, some of the tweets that you've read, I think is putting the point very well, is this particular court, ICC, was created after a critical analysis on Africa and how Africa was carrying its affairs. We've seen crimes being committed. We saw what happened in Rwanda. But the international community was sitting and watching, and they didn't have an avenue on how they can intervene. And probably one of the reasons that formed this particular court was looking at Africa and saying, there are people in Africa who are actually downtrodden on others. And we as the international community, we as superpowers, we need to protect those ones that probably might not have an avenue to have justice in their own country, and that could be one of the reasons that informed in the formation of
course,
this particular
Kosovo also
case.
happened around the same time as Rwanda, so that also was a consideration.
Yeah. But going forward, I think later, maybe some years to come, we might be seeing a situation where the like what we had in Rwanda, the formation of the tribunal, we might be having, Africa may create its own court, or
the African Court of Justice,
Court of Justice that probably will deal away with the Western powers interfering with cases similar to the one that we have.
Okay, Aaron, final thoughts now. Actually, that should make your final thought. The African Court of Justice, what jurisdiction should it have? And let's be frank, I mean, there isn't much faith in judicial systems on the continent. Do you think that the African Court of Justice, as proposed by some people within the African Union, could work on this continent? Your final thoughts, Aaron?
It will be difficult, because if you look at Africa, we have the sub-Saharan Africa and we have the upper side of Africa. I don't think the Arabic side of Africa
we really can't consider. I mean, they belong more to the Arab League at least.
And even in sub-Saharan Africa, we are informed of different ideologies. If you look at a place like South Africa, I don't think there would be signatories to that. They would say, wait a minute, I think we are way ahead of that. If you look at countries that are more leaning towards China, and the others which are leaning to Western, they might clash at some point and say, wait a minute, I don't think we will be able to agree. And even in terms of people who will be running that court.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, a matter of mechanics. You see, so one of the criticisms, and I'll just say this as part of my final thoughts as well, one of the criticisms of the International Criminal Court, it doesn't have a standing army or a police force that can enforce a warrant. Would African states allow for there to be like a standby force or police force? And this is something that goes to the actual mechanics of it, an actual a police force that would enforce a warrant. Yeah, I mean, it will be a very hard decision to make, and whether it will be effective. For example, if you tell me if we had such a force, will it now be sent to Sudan and told now Omar al-Bashir, head of state, get out?
Al-Bashir, and will the Sudanese the forces allow that particular force to get hold of their president? It is difficult.
That is true. Aaron Ocheng, Associate Editor, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Speaks. Points to ponder upon. Is ICC a blessing or a curse? One or two last tweets let me read for you before we play you out this afternoon. The ICC has become a scourge of impunity on the continent, and African dictators are taking notice. Eric Mwangi Karaoke says that. Let's see one more. It's a blessing to most. African leaders commit crimes against humanity on rivals to remain in power. That's Mark Philo. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us on Africa Speaks. It's been a very interesting discussion. Of course, the subject of the International Criminal Court's actions on the continent will be controversial for a little while longer. Now, before we play out, this is my last episode on Africa Speaks. Joy Doreen Bira joins you again next week. It's been fun. I hope I've been able to fill those very big shoes very well. Now, let's play you out with a track that's currently hitting the airwaves and enjoying some good airplay in South Africa, but also in Kenya. Kona by Mafikizolo and Uhuru. Fantastic track. So enjoy this and have a blessed weekend. I'm John Allen Namu.